Yippee-yay!
Hi guys, and welcome to New Vegas Mod Organizer Part 2. In Part 1 we covered the basics. We set our game up ready for Mod Organizer, we installed Mod Organizer, and we set it up. But in this video we're going to move on and start modding our game. We're going to set up a base profile, a kind of profile that we will use to create all other profiles, and we're going to install some of the mods I consider essential. These are going to be mods that change the user interface, the heads-up display, and add things like menu options for mods, the MCM. Now, some of these mods in the past have caused people some worries, but hopefully with recent updates and a little patience, I'm going to show you how there's nothing to worry about. These mods are actually reasonably simple to install now. So let's get started and set up our base profile. So I've got Mod Organizer installed. I have the executables that I'm going to need installed and set up, NVSE, the 4GB executable, and so on. And I'm ready to start modding my game. And in its current state, my game is pretty unmodded. And I'm going to start by installing a few basic mods, the ones I always start with, which are the user interface mods. They usually have to be the first things you install, well worth installing them. And so I'm going to set those things up. I'm going to be setting up the Darnified UI because that's what I like to use. I'm going to use OneHUD. I'm going to install MCM because MCM is pretty much essential for a variety of mods, and it's also very useful for OneHUD. So I'm going to be installing those mods, and I'm going to consider that my baseline profile. Now, if you have not seen the previous videos on Mod Organizer, the ones I made for Skyrim, you may not know what a profile is. I will leave a link here to a video devoted to that subject if you want to get all the details. But the short version is you can set up multiple profiles to run what is essentially different sets of mods for different save games. So for example, right now I've got the default profile, and all it's actually doing is running the vanilla game, possibly with the 4GB executable or NVSE installed, but that's it. And in fact, I'm actually going to go along and manage my profiles, and I'm going to rename this to Vanilla. That is the vanilla profile. If I run that, it will run pretty much the unmodded game. As I said, if I chose New Vegas, it would run the unmodded game. If I run NVSE, it runs the game with NVSE, but no other mods, and so on. And then I'm actually going to start a completely new profile. I'm going to create a profile. I'm going to use the default game settings, and I'm going to call this base. This is going to be my base profile. It is going to be the one I use for any of my profiles, probably as a base. It will be the one I use if I'm testing very, very simple things. And I am going to select automatic archive invalidation for this profile, not for the vanilla one. We don't need archive invalidation for the vanilla profile, but for the base profile, I'm going to automatic archive invalidation. I'm not going to use local save games yet. But that's it. I've got the base profile created, and now I'm going to add the mods I consider utterly essential regardless of what I'm doing. And the first such mod is the Darnified UI. Okay, step one, install the Darnified UI for New Vegas. And you can find that on the BethSoft forums. I will try to remember to leave a link in the description down below. And there it is, test version 4. That is the version you're going to need. So I'm just going to save link as, and I'm going to save it to my desktop. Now, the quickest way to install this is to just click on the Install New Mod from an Archive icon, select the file, which is there, go to Manual. You should always click the Manual installation, check everything is as it's supposed to be, and then click OK and probably change the name. I'll change the name in a while. And as you can see, it has now been installed. However, that is not how I recommend doing it, just in case you want to reinstall it at a later date, because you'll notice it's not listed in our Downloads tab, which I kind of like. I kind of like having all of the mods I've got installed here in this tab here, so that I can play around with them later on. Perhaps install different versions. With this mod, it's probably not necessary, but I'm going to do that anyway. So I'm going to remove this mod. And I'm going to select it and copy. And then I'm going to go along to the hard drive where the downloads are stored for Mod Organizer. Now, for me, it's on my D drive, Mod Organizer, Fallout New Vegas, downloads. And I'm going to paste it there. And you can see it has now appeared here. If you don't know where it is, go along to the Advanced section, click on Advanced and check your download directory. As you can see, I have changed it to a different drive. Now I can actually delete this file. I could probably have actually cut it instead of copy it. Go along to Downloads, double click and install from there. I'm actually going to call it Darnified UI. Go for the manual installation, check everything is fine, which it is, and click OK. There you go. So I've now got the Darnified UI files set up and ready to go. I can select the files, but I still have the download file. It's neatly archived and I can play around with it later on. Now, of course, the last thing I have to do to get Darnified UI working is set the fonts up correctly. This does not mean I'm going to re-add that section to the ini files I cleaned earlier, because Mod Organizer actually uses a new version of the ini file, a version it has copied and created for each profile. If I actually go along to my Fallout New Vegas game folder and go to Mod Organizer, Profiles, and I look at the vanilla profile, this folder now has its own fallout.ini and falloutprefs.ini file. These two files are the files it uses instead of the one that is in my game's Fallout New Vegas. This is where I need to change things. And you will also see the exact same thing in the base profile. This means I can have different settings for different profiles, i.e. I change the fonts in the base profile, but I leave the fonts as vanilla in the vanilla profile. Now, you don't actually have to change them here. You don't have to use a text editor. The Mod Organizer tool itself actually allows you to do that from this interface. In actual fact, there are two ways of achieving this in Mod Organizer. There is the ini edit and the ini tweak. But let's keep things simple and start with the editing of the ini files. Simply make sure you're on the base profile. Click this icon for Tools, ini Editor, and you can edit the fallout.ini and the falloutprefs.ini directly from here. So if I go along and Control F, fonts, I can find the correct section. And if I go to the Darnified UI download page and select that block of text, Control C, select that and Control V, I've now pasted the fonts that I wanted to use. I'm going to do the same here, just to make sure. And I'm going to save that. If I reopen that, just to double check, let's give you, there you go, fonts, as you can see, the Darnified fonts. But if I go back to the vanilla one and do the same thing and check the fonts now, it should still be, there you go, the vanilla fonts. The second way of achieving this, and probably the way I would recommend doing it, is instead of editing the ini file for the profile, add an ini tweak for the mod, in this case Darnified UI. And to do that, you just double click Darnified UI and go along to the ini file section. Now, it has no ini file and it has nothing currently in the ini tweaks. So we are going to create an ini tweak. I'm going to right click, create tweak, and I'm going to call it fonts. Okay, and I now have a blank ini tweak, which I do need to select. Then click on this side and Control V, paste the list of fonts as dictated on the Darnified UI page or from your old ini file if you prefer, and then hit save. Now what this is doing is it's telling Mod Organizer when you run the game with Darnified UI selected and this ini tweak is selected, replace the font section of the ini files with this. So instead of using the font section in the Fallout ini file or the Fallout prefs ini file, it uses this section instead. So you get the Darnified fonts. And as you can imagine, the advantage to this is you can select the Darnified UI mod in any of your profiles and automatically gain these fonts, including the vanilla profile. If I went back to the vanilla profile, selected the Darnified UI, I would not need to add the fonts. They would be added automatically. Also, one small thing, the semicolon in front of some of these lines basically tells the system to ignore the line. It's called a comment out. You're commenting out this entire line, it's ignored. You can, if you like, remove any of the lines that have semicolons in front of them so that it looks a little neater. The main reason to leave them there is if you want to change it back at a later date, which you might want to do in a normal Fallout ini file, but you will never want to do in the Darnified UI ini tweak section. So you can actually remove those just to make it look a little neater. But make sure you delete the right ones. If you are in any doubt, don't delete them. And I can tell you now, there's no advantage to deleting them. There's no difference between how I saved it a second ago and how it is now, other than it looks slightly neater to me. It is not faster, it does not give you any bonus or boost in game, okay? So, it's up to you. Then I'm going to hit save again, and finally, close. Oh, and I would like to quickly mention the red box that you see highlighted here. Some of you may be a little bothered by that. Don't worry about it. Completely ignore it. All it means is I'm currently filtering the mods that can be seen here, and that is because I added this section of the video later on, and I just want to make it look clean. Please just ignore it. It does not mean anything important. And now all that's left to do is actually check whether or not the mod is installed correctly. See if it runs without crashing. The little icon here is actually a good sign. There you go. Correct fonts and no crash. Success! And just to be absolutely sure, I'm loading up a game, a completely unmodded game except for the UI. And there you go. It looks pretty horrible actually. I'm so used to the modded game, I can't stand the look of the unmodded game. Plus I also can detect that the New Vegas stutter remover is not installed. I can actually feel that in my movement. However, so far so good. I have Darnified UI functioning as intended. Okay, so we're off to a good start. We have got one mod installed, and it was a mod that we had to download as a file and then add to Mod Organizer manually. Now we're going to install a couple of mods via Nexus's download with manager feature. Assuming that you set up a mod organizer correctly, this will mean the mods get added to your mod organizer download immediately. The two mods I'm going to be installing at this stage are the mod configuration menu and OneHUD or OHUD. I chose the mod configuration menu for two reasons. The first reason is it really is an essential mod in my opinion for Fallout New Vegas. There are so many mods that use it that you really should have this installed. There's no reason not to install it as well. It has absolutely no effect in-game when you're playing. It only has an effect when you open the menu. So when you press escape and go to the menu, it gives you a new option, which is the mod configuration menu, and that allows you to change a lot of things in a lot of mods. And that's the only time it's ever really active, so you will have no performance problems whatsoever. Just install it. If you don't know what it is, trust me on this, you need the mod configuration menu. The second reason I chose MCM was that it has a scripted installer that requires knowledge of your installed files. It needs to be able to find the files that you have in your data folder. But of course, we don't actually have any files in our data folder, or at least we don't have our modded files, and thus this sort of scripted installer had a problem. And originally, I actually recorded quite a lot of footage showing how you would get around that. There was a mod you could use in conjunction with Mod Organizer that would allow you to do all of this. However, since recording that, the Mod Organizer creator has released an update to Mod Organizer that actually integrates that fix. So I've had to come back to show you, the new way of doing it. You will probably notice my Mod Organizer has now been updated to version 1.2.17. And if you have been using Mod Organizer and you are not using this version or later, update. It's a really, really important update. This update makes my second reason completely and utterly a non-issue. However, I'm leaving this section in the video so that if you've been using Mod Organizer and this has been something you have been bothered by, you can see that it's been fixed, but also to explain why in certain parts of this video you're going to see in my download section a lot more mods than you saw just now. The reason is I've had to come back later on and edit the video. Please ignore that. With that in mind, let's talk about OneHUD. We're going to install OneHUD for two reasons as well. The first reason, it is a mod that I made, so, full disclosure, it is a mod I made, but I also consider this to be pretty much essential for any of my playthroughs. It allows you to customize the heads-up display, add a lot of new useful features such as carry weight, a clock, and that type of thing. It allows you to move items around the heads-up display, and it also allows you to hide various aspects of the heads-up display and the entire thing if you want, and have it appear when it's needed, so it's a lot less intrusive. The second reason we're using OneHUD is it requires MCM. It uses MCM to show all of its different menu options, and we need one such mod to see if the mod configuration menu is actually working. So that's the second reason I chose it. Now, if you have set up Mod Organizer correctly, when you go along to the file section, if you wanted Mod Organizer to be your mod manager of choice for Fallout New Vegas, which I'm assuming you do, when you click Download with Manager, it will automatically download to the Mod Organizer. I am actually going to close it just to test that theory. Hit the button, and there you go. It opens up Mod Organizer, so everything is working just fine. It has downloaded the mod configuration menu. I'm going to do the same for OneHUD. I need to download with Manager, and I will also require the Darnified patch. I'm using Darn's UI, so I'm going to download with Manager on that. So I should have two files, OneHUD and OneHUD Darnified patch. And I believe that's all of the files I need for those two mods. Okay, so I now have the two mods downloaded along with a lot of other mods. Please ignore those. And I'm going to start by installing the mod configuration menu. I'm going to reiterate, you need to make sure Mod Organizer has been updated to version 1.2.17 or later. It can be a later version, but it needs to be at least 1.2.17 or this will not work correctly. Go along to the mod configuration menu and double click on it. And you will get, I will move this aside a second, you will get this little pop-up coming up. Do not click Force Close. It's running an external installer and it's just doing its thing. Sometimes it may take quite a few seconds, maybe even minutes, before the installer window pops up over it. Just leave it. You do not need to do anything. Don't click force close. Then click on install. It will do its thing and it's actually done. Remember to activate it and check that the mod configuration ESP is actually selected. But that's it. The mod configuration menu has now been installed. Now, one thing I would recommend doing right now is right-clicking on this mod and choosing rename mod, actually. Space, bracket, Darnified. The reason for this is when I installed this mod, I had the Darnified UI selected. Therefore, this mod is really installed as a Darnified version. If I deselected Darnified UI now, this mod is actually not installed correctly for this particular setup. If you actually want to, you can run the mod configuration twice, do the same thing, and now what I've got is the mod configuration menu, the vanilla version, and mod configuration, the Darnified version. So now if I do that, I have mod configuration menu installed without Darn's UI. And if I do that, I've got the mod configuration menu installed with the Darnified UI. Now, I will never use this. I will never use Fallout New Vegas without the Darnified UI, so I probably don't need this. But if you are the sort of person who's flicking between profiles, you might want to do this. It's just good practice to make sure that when you've installed a mod, if it is a specific version, name it so that you know that. To keep things neat, I'm actually going to remove that right now, just to keep this nice and neat. And now I'm going to install OneHUD. And to do that, I simply double-click the main file. Good idea to click manual again, although I know this mod is packaged correctly. And then click OK. This is the vanilla version. It is not Darnified. It is not Darnified at all. Of course, I'm going to need the Darnified patch. Now, there are two ways to actually do this. The first way to do this is simply double-click and change the name. Now, the reason for changing the name is it will install the Darnified patch as a separate mod. If you leave the name the same, it will not install it as a separate mod. So I change the name, manual, check the file structure, which is just one file, and click OK. I then activate this. If I actually double click on this mod and look at conflicts, I can see that this contains one file that conflicts with OneHUD and the Darnified UI. This will now work. I now have OneHUD and the Darnified patch. And doing it like this, once again, allows me the choice. So for example, if I didn't have the Darnified UI installed on one profile, I could have OneHUD selected. But then if I did have Darnified, I could have that selected. It gives me the options over different profiles. I generally do not recommend doing it that way. I personally would have two versions of OneHUD installed. One, the Darnified version, and one, the full vanilla version. Very similar to how I did the mod configuration menu. So I'm going to delete that because I don't think it's the best way to do it. And what I'm going to do instead is double-click the Darnified patch. Again, click manual, but leave the name the same. Check this. Check that it looks good. Click OK. And when it asks, I'm going to click merge. And what this will do is it will overwrite any of the existing files with the new file, but it will leave the other files untouched. Merge. That is now the Darnified version of OneHUD. And once again, rename Darnified. So as you can see, at the moment, I have three mods installed: the Darnified UI, the mod configuration menu, the Darnified version, and OneHUD, the Darnified version. And once in game, you can see OneHUD is already working. Many of the heads-up display elements have disappeared. If I press the toggle key, they all come back. They're still Darnified, but you can also see several of them have been moved. They've been lowered, they've been repositioned, the compass has been moved all the way to the top, more like it is in Skyrim for example, the bracket has been removed, and so on. As you can see, OneHUD is working perfectly. If I put the weapon away, the condition and ammo count will disappear as well. There you go. And if I press escape, I look at the mod configuration menu and I have the Darnified version. These are the Darnified fonts. Everything is working as intended. I now have Darnified UI working correctly, the mod configuration menu working correctly, and OneHUD. Now there are actually still a few things missing. There are a few heads-up display elements that should be visible right now. OneHUD actually adds a few new features. If I go along to mod configuration and go to the extra HUD, it adds a clock, it adds primary needs values, things like your thirst, your hunger and so on, resists. These type of things are added to your heads-up display. But as you can see, they are not present. And the reason they're not present, well, that's one of the slight complications with heads-up display elements. They cannot just be dropped into your data folder the way most normal mods are. What is required is a little editing of the menu files. Now, for quite some time now, the way to achieve this was either via a scripted installer that came with the mod itself, or a mod called Unified HUD, which in itself was just one giant scripted installer that would fix your heads-up display for you. Now, that was a bit of an issue when scripted installers were a problem, but of course it isn't anymore. So if you want to use Unified HUD to add all of those elements, you can. But I actually don't recommend doing that anymore. I actually recommend using the User Interface Organizer, which is a new mod that pretty much does the same thing, but in a better way. If you want full details of what this mod does and how it differs from the Unified HUD, I actually made a completely separate video devoted to this mod, and you can go along and watch that. But the short version is this mod adds those heads-up display elements when you start the game, each and every time, and it means you don't have to keep running the mod every time you change your mods. It should be easier. It's a lot more robust, and as I said, it's the way I recommend it. And if you're wondering whether you can trust that evaluation, as I've said before in previous videos, the Unified HUD is actually one of my mods, and I recommend you use this mod instead. So make of that what you will. So go along to the file section and download with Manager for this. And once the file has downloaded, just double click and it will do its thing. And it's pretty simple to install. So there you go. Just make sure you activate it. Now it has no ESP. If you look at the file tree, it has no ESP whatsoever. It has a plugin for NVSE and it has its own little private files. So that is all that is needed. So you don't need to check anything in the plugin section. And once in game, you can now see on the right hand side a clock, my radiation, or my resists, how much weight I'm carrying, primary needs, and so on. It has successfully added the new elements, and it will do this for any mods that actually add heads-up display elements as long as they're supported by that mod. And to date, I think all mods that you're going to use will be. Now, once you actually exit the game, if you start up Mod Organizer again, you may notice this little warning. And if you click on it, it says there are files in your overwrite mod. So close that. My overwrite mod is down here, and this is essentially a dumping ground for any files generated during the running process. So generated from Mod Organizer or from a tool that was run from Mod Organizer, any files that were generated get placed here. And what is important about the files that are placed here is they are used by every single solitary profile. So any of these files that are here will be available to every profile whether you want it or not. Now in this particular case, it doesn't actually make much difference, and the mod author suggests not actually deleting these files, leaving it as they are, and you can actually do that. You could quit Mod Organizer and keep running your game and everything will work just fine. There is one last mod that I consider a baseline mod, a mod that I literally will not play this game without, and it is a mod called the New Vegas Stutter Remover. Now, I've actually done a video on this mod before. In fact, it was one of my first ever videos. I will leave a link here and you can go watch that if you really want the full details. But basically, this game has a horrible stutter. It's very noticeable when you side strafe. I don't know if you're going to see it in the video. That's one of the problems. It's very hard to see in a video, but it is very, very noticeable for me in game. It's noticeable when I turn, but especially when I sidestep. It's pretty horrible and it makes the game feel as if I'm running at about 15 frames a second, even though I know I'm not. It is a problem that has plagued a few of the Bethesda-based games, Oblivion, Fallout 3 and so on, and is pretty horrible, but luckily there is a mod to fix it. So I'm just going to go along to New Vegas Stutter Remover, Files, Download with Manager, and then install once it's done its thing. Data, set data directory, and it is an NVSE plugin, as you can see, that has some component DLLs and an ini file. The ini file is going to be important. I'm going to go along, double click the mod, go to the file tree, and open up the ini file I just mentioned. And I would recommend turning off the manage FPS. So I changed that to 0. That's going to be completely up to you. You can actually get it to manage your FPS. Some people like that. Some people think it helps. I generally don't. That's completely up to you. Play with the values if you like. But you can edit the ini file here, right here in Mod Manager. And Control S. And now it is set. Select it and run the game, and my stutters should be gone. And in game, there you go. That is a lot smoother for me, especially when sidestepping. A lot smoother. This is now playable and feels more like 60 frames a second. One thing I will mention is in this ini file, there used to be an option bfix 64Hz equal 1 after log to console. I didn't see that in the latest version, so I tried adding it, and I don't think it made any difference. I'd have to test it some more, but honestly, I think this has been removed for a reason. It's probably always set true now, no matter what. So you probably don't need that value. However, I can tell you, putting this value back in didn't reintroduce the stutters. So you probably can just leave it. You probably do not need it. I will put an annotation here if I find out anything to the contrary. Oh, and there is actually an alternative method for editing the ini file for the stutter remover, and that is to go to the ini file section of the mod. When you double click on the mod, you can go to the ini file section, select this ini file, and you can actually edit it here. If you edit it here, you can save it. And that is pretty much it for the mods in my base profile. I should just mention the priority of these mods just briefly. If you don't know what priority is, it's similar to the load order of your ESPs, not quite the same. For full details, I did do a video devoted to conflicts and priorities, and I would recommend you watch that thoroughly. It's a pretty important subject, but in this particular instance, the important thing, well, there's two important things. First of all, the Darnified UI. It should probably go at the top. It certainly needs to go above the mod configuration menu and OneHUD, because both of these mods conflict with it. They overwrite, well, in this case, the start menu, and for OneHUD, it overwrites the HUD main menu. These two need to be below the Darnified UI. The second point to note is not critical right now with the mods that we've got installed, but it will become important later on. As you install mods that add things to the heads-up display, you're going to have to make sure that OneHUD comes below them. So, for example, Project Nevada, the Advanced Recon Thermal Night Vision, those type of mods that add heads-up display elements must come before OneHUD in this list. So OneHUD should always be below those mods. In fact, you can actually put it at the bottom of this list and it will work just fine, and it probably needs to stay reasonably low. Again, it will depend on the mods that you add. But if you do add a mod that adds something to the heads-up display and you do notice it is not being hidden with OneHUD as it should be, this is the place to check. Check the order they come here and make sure OneHUD is below it. Okay guys, well that is about it for this video. We now actually have a profile and we have some mods installed. But in the next video, what I'm going to be doing is setting up an actual profile for my character Jack. I will be exporting all of the mods from Nexus Mod Manager over to Mod Organizer, and I will begin the process of installing all of those mods, starting with Project Nevada and Project Nevada Extra Options. You are, of course, more than welcome to join me for that video, and if you do, I look forward to seeing you there. And until then, remember, as always, have fun.
Jingle, jingle, jangle, as I go riding merrily along. Jingle, jangle, they sing, oh, ain't you glad you're